My name is Julia Lawrence, 28 years old, and my dream vacation to Greece almost collapsed when my parents convinced me to cancel it because of money problems. After promising to help me financially in an emergency, my father made me feel guilty about my trip while secretly booking a luxury family cruise that excluded only me. My brother thought I'd never find out about their deception, but the cruise itinerary accidentally left in our family group chat changed everything. The consequences were much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Before continuing my story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Like and subscribe for more family secrets nobody tells. It all started last January when I'd finally saved enough for my dream trip to Greece. After 3 years of working extra shifts at the hospital as a nurse, putting aside every spare dollar, I was ready to book my solo adventure. The trip wasn't just a vacation. It was my reward for surviving the brutal healthcare worker shortage, the endless overtime, and the emotional toll of losing patients during the pandemic. I remember sitting in my small apartment in Minneapolis, wrapped in a blanket against the bitter cold, scrolling through images of sun-drenched Santorini. The white buildings against that impossibly blue sea looked like paradise to me. I'd planned everything: 2 weeks in May, island hopping, eating authentic Greek food, and maybe even a romance with a handsome local. I was so excited that I called my parents to share the news. "That's wonderful, honey," my mom said, but I noticed a strange hesitation in her voice. 2 days later, my dad called. His voice sounded different, more serious than usual. "Julia, I need to talk to you about something important," he said. "Your mom and I are having some financial difficulties. The business isn't doing well, and we might need to borrow some money in the next few months." My father owned a construction company in Chicago that had been successful for years. This was the first I'd heard of any problems. "What's wrong, Dad? Is everything okay?" I asked, immediately worried. "We'll be fine, but we might need a loan to cover some unexpected expenses. I hate to ask, but if we needed help, would you be able to support us a little?" Without hesitation, I said yes. My parents had helped me through nursing school. They'd always been there for me. How could I not help them if they needed it? "Maybe you should hold off on that Greece trip," my dad suggested. "Just for now. Put that money aside in case we need it." I felt a knot form in my stomach. The trip I'd dreamed about for years suddenly felt selfish in the face of my family's needs. "Of course, Dad. Family comes first," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. I canceled my reservations the next day. The airline charged me a cancellation fee, and the small boutique hotel in Santorini kept my deposit. I lost almost $800, but I told myself it was worth it to know I could help my parents if they needed it. For weeks afterward, I kept waiting for my dad to call about the loan, but he never did. When I called to check in, he brushed it off, saying they were managing and things were looking up. I was relieved but confused. Had the financial problems been exaggerated? Then came the text that changed everything. It was a Sunday morning in March, about 2 months after I'd canceled my trip. I was working a double shift at the hospital when my phone buzzed with a notification from our family group chat. My younger brother Tyler had accidentally sent a screenshot of a cruise itinerary to the main chat instead of directly to my sister Brittany. The image showed a 10-day Caribbean cruise booked for my parents, my sister Brittany, her husband Jake, their 2 kids, and my brother Tyler. The booking was dated January 15th, just 3 days after my dad called about their financial difficulties. The total came to over $15,000. I stared at my phone screen until a patient call pulled me away. Throughout my shift, I kept thinking about that cruise booking. My family was planning a luxury vacation while I'd canceled my dream trip to save money for them, and they hadn't even invited me. The worst part wasn't the deception, it was the exclusion. My entire family was going on this cruise together, and no one had bothered to tell me about it, let alone invite me. I finished my shift in a daze, fighting back tears as I changed out of my scrubs. When I got home, I checked the group chat again. My brother had quickly deleted the screenshot, followed by a private text to me. "Please don't mention this to Mom and Dad. It was supposed to be a surprise." A surprise for whom? Certainly not for me. I spent that night pacing my apartment, alternating between hurt and anger. Should I confront them? Demand an explanation? I drafted dozens of texts but deleted them all. Something told me to wait and observe. The next day, I called my sister Brittany under the pretense of wanting to meet my niece and nephew for ice cream that weekend. "This weekend's not good," she said quickly. "We've got, a lot going on." "What about the following weekend?" I pressed. "We're busy then, too. I'll let you know when we're free." Her hesitation told me everything. The cruise was soon, and she was avoiding me until they were gone. I checked the screenshot again. The departure date was in 2 weeks. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I logged into our family's shared Amazon account that we'd never bothered to separate and checked my dad's purchase history. There it was. Caribbean Cruise Essentials ordered 3 weeks ago. New swimsuits, sunscreen, underwater cameras, and even seasickness bands. They were really going through with this. A week later, my mom called with an obviously fabricated story about visiting my aunt in Florida. My dad followed up with a text about taking some time off for business planning and being unavailable for a while. Not one of them told me the truth. The day they departed, I tracked the cruise ship online. It was real. They were really on it. All of them except me. I took an extra shift that day to distract myself, but I couldn't focus. A co-worker, Diane, noticed and pulled me aside. "What's going on, Julia? You seem a million miles away?" I told her everything. About canceling Greece, about the secret cruise, about being the only one excluded. Saying it out loud made it even more painful. Diane listened patiently, then said something that struck me. "You know, some families have a designated caretaker, the reliable one who always sacrifices for everyone else. Looks like that's the role they've assigned to you." Her words hit hard because they rang true. Throughout my life, I'd always been the responsible one. The one who stayed close to home during college to help with my grandma. The one who changed career plans to nursing because my parents thought it was more practical than marine biology. My original passion. The one who never complained, who always showed up, who put everyone else first. "So what do I do now?" I asked her. "You stop playing by their rules," she said simply. "They've shown you where you stand. Believe them." That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them when they returned. I wouldn't cause a scene or demand an explanation. Instead, I would quietly recalibrate our relationship. No more dropping everything when they called. No more being the emergency backup. No more sacrificing my dreams for people who couldn't even be honest with me. I used the next 10 days to make some changes. I applied for a travel nursing position in California, something I'd considered for years, but never pursued because it would take me far from family. I signed up for a marine biology volunteer program in Key West for my upcoming vacation time. Small steps toward the life I wanted, not the one they expected me to live. When they returned from the cruise, sunburned and happy, no one mentioned it to me. My mom called to chat as if nothing had happened, talking about my aunt in Florida and the wonderful weather they'd had. My dad texted to ask if I could help them pick up a new couch they'd ordered. My sister posted cruise photos on social media, but carefully untagged me so they wouldn't appear in my feed. The elaborate deception continued, and I played along. I didn't call them out. I didn't confront them. I simply began the slow, deliberate process of disentangling my life from theirs. 2 weeks later, I got the California job. It paid nearly double my current salary and included housing assistance. I would be moving in 30 days. I didn't tell my family right away. Instead, I waited for our monthly Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The first since their return. I wanted to see their faces when I broke the news. Sunday dinner at my parents' suburban Chicago home had been a tradition since I moved out. This time, as I pulled into their driveway, I felt different, stronger, more resolved. The familiar 2-story colonial with its perfectly manicured lawn no longer felt like a comfort. It felt like a stage set for a performance I was tired of giving. Everyone was already there when I arrived. Mom in the kitchen, Dad grilling on the patio, Brittany's kids running through the sprinkler in the backyard. The normalcy of it all was almost laughable considering the secret they were all keeping. Julia! Mom hugged me like nothing was wrong. I made your favorite potato salad. Thanks, Mom, I said, hugging her back stiffly. Throughout dinner, they shared inside jokes about that time in Florida, with pointed glances at each other. They were referring to the cruise but maintaining the charade for my benefit. My brother Tyler looked uncomfortable each time, but he didn't break ranks. After dessert, as we sat around the patio table, I decided it was time. I have some news, I said, interrupting a story my dad was telling about a client. All eyes turned to me. I've accepted a position in California. I'm moving in 4 weeks. The silence was deafening. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. California? Dad frowned. What are you talking about? You have a job here. It's a travel nursing position, better pay, better hours, and housing assistance included. But what about us? What about family dinners? Mom looked genuinely distressed. I'm sure you'll manage without me, I said coolly. Like you did on your Caribbean cruise. The words hung in the air. No one spoke. My sister Brittany suddenly became very interested in her napkin. Dad's face flushed red. Tyler told you, my mother finally said, shooting my brother an accusatory look. He didn't have to. He accidentally sent the itinerary to the group chat. But even if he hadn't, I would have figured it out eventually. You're not exactly master spies. We were going to tell you, Brittany jumped in. We just didn't want to hurt your feelings. By excluding me from a family vacation while manipulating me into canceling my own trip? How considerate of you. Dad cleared his throat. Now, Julia, it wasn't like that. The cruise was a package deal through my business contacts. We could only get 6 tickets. Don't lie to me, I said quietly. I saw the booking confirmation. You paid full price for everyone. You chose to exclude me. The excuses came flooding out then. How they thought I was too busy with work. How they assumed I wouldn't want to spend time with Brittany's noisy kids. How they were planning to take me on a special trip later, though they had no details about this mythical future vacation. I listened to them stumble over their contradictory explanations until I couldn't take it anymore. Do you want to know the worst part? I interrupted. It's not even the cruise. It's that Dad called me with a fake financial emergency to manipulate me into canceling Greece. You made me feel selfish for wanting something for myself, while you were planning a luxury vacation without me. Dad had the decency to look ashamed. We didn't mean to hurt you, Jules. We just thought, you thought I'd never find out. Or you thought I'd just accept it because that's what I always do. I'm reliable Julia who never makes waves. My mother reached for my hand across the table. Sweetie, we love you. You're so independent. We sometimes forget that you might feel left out. Independent isn't the same as not wanting to be included, Mom. The conversation circled for another hour. There were tears, mostly from my mom, defenses, mainly from my dad, and awkward attempts at mediation, from Tyler. Brittany oscillated between defensive and apologetic, unable to settle on a consistent position. In the end, nothing was resolved. They were sorry I was hurt, but not truly sorry for what they'd done. The distinction was important. As I drove home that night, I felt strangely lighter. The confrontation hadn't gone as I'd imagined. There was no satisfying moment of them realizing how deeply they'd wounded me. But I'd said my piece. And more importantly, I'd held my ground about California. The next few weeks were a blur of preparations. I gave notice at the hospital, packed up my apartment, and arranged for movers. My parents made several attempts to change my mind about moving. Dad offered to help me financially if I stayed. Mom cried about missing me and not seeing me for years, despite the existence of airplanes and video calls. Brittany suggested I was overreacting to one misunderstanding. None of it swayed me. The cruise incident had merely been the catalyst, the moment I finally saw clearly how one-sided our family dynamic had always been. The day before my move, I had dinner with Diane, who had become a close friend and supporter during this time. Are you nervous about tomorrow? She asked as we shared a bottle of wine. Oddly, no, I replied. For the first time in forever, I feel like I'm doing something completely for myself. It's scary, but exhilarating. Your family will adjust, she said. And if they don't, that's on them, not you. I nodded, grateful for her clarity. I know. I'm not cutting them off or anything dramatic. I'm just rebalancing things. To rebalancing, she said, raising her glass. We clinked glasses, and I felt a surge of excitement about my new beginning. California was everything I'd hoped for and more. I settled into a beachside apartment in San Diego with a small balcony overlooking the Pacific. My new hospital was modern and well-staffed, and my colleagues welcomed me warmly. For the first time in years, I didn't feel constantly exhausted and overwhelmed. The distance from my family turned out to be exactly what I needed. Our communications became less frequent, but more genuine. Without the pressure of weekly dinners and constant availability, I found myself actually looking forward to our video calls. My parents were struggling to adjust to the new dynamic. Mom called daily at first, then grudgingly scaled back when I explained my work schedule made that impossible. Dad was more distant, sending occasional texts that felt formal and strained. 3 months after my move, I took that marine biology volunteer vacation in Key West I'd planned. For 2 weeks, I helped researchers track coral health and dolphin populations. I posted pictures of myself on boats, in scuba gear, and with new friends from around the world. It wasn't Greece, but it was still magical in its own way. The day after I returned to San Diego, my sister Brittany called unexpectedly. "Those Key West photos looked amazing," she said, sounding genuinely impressed. "You seem really happy out there." "I am," I replied, surprised by her warmth. "How are things back home?" She hesitated. "Different. Mom and Dad fight a lot now. I think you were the buffer we didn't realize we needed." "What do you mean?" "You were always the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over. Without you here, tensions that were probably always there are just out in the open now." I didn't know how to respond to that. It wasn't my responsibility to be their emotional regulator, but I still cared about their happiness. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. "Don't be. It's not your fault. If anything, it's made me realize how much we took you for granted." She paused. "I'm sorry about the cruise, Julia. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, but I went along with it anyway." It was the first genuine apology I'd received from any of them. I felt a lump form in my throat. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." "I miss you," she added quietly. "The kids miss their Aunt Julia, too." "I miss you guys, too. You should bring them out to visit sometime. There's a great children's beach near my place they'd love." "Really? You'd want us to visit?" "Of course. I'm creating boundaries, Britt, not cutting you all off completely." She laughed. "Fair enough. I'll talk to Jake about planning a trip." After we hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. It was validating to hear her acknowledge what had happened, but it also made me sad to think about the family dysfunction I'd been unconsciously managing for years. Over the next few months, things continued to evolve. Brittany did bring her family to visit, and we had a wonderful long weekend of beach days and zoo trips. My brother Tyler came out for a few days and crashed on my couch, eager to escape the increasing tension at our parents' house. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. We talked less frequently than before, and when we did, there was often an underlying current of unresolved feelings. Dad had stopped asking when I was coming back home, but still made comments about my job in California being temporary. Mom had settled into a pattern of carefully avoiding any topics that might lead to conflict, which made our conversations superficial. 6 months after my move, I met someone. His name was David, a marine biologist I'd connected with during my volunteer work, who happened to live just 30 minutes from me in San Diego. Our relationship developed quickly, fueled by shared interests and values. For the first time, I was with someone who encouraged my independence rather than trying to contain it. 7 months into my California life, I got a call from Tyler in the middle of the night. "It's Dad," he said, his voice tight with stress. "He's in the hospital. They think it might be his heart." I sat up in bed, immediately alert. "How bad is it?" "They're running tests. Mom's a mess. Brittany's with the kids, so I'm at the hospital, but I don't know what to do." "I'll be on the first flight out," I promised. Within hours, I was on a plane to Chicago, a knot of worry in my stomach. Whatever had happened between us, he was still my father. David had driven me to the airport at 4 a.m., assuring me he'd take care of my plants and check on my apartment while I was gone. The flight felt endless. I kept thinking about my last conversation with my dad, a stilted exchange about the weather and a new restaurant he'd tried. We hadn't said "I love you" at the end like we used to. What if that was our last conversation ever? When I finally arrived at the hospital, I found my mother sitting alone in the waiting room, looking small and fragile. When she saw me, she stood up and held out her arms. I walked into her embrace without hesitation. "It was just a scare," she whispered against my hair. "Not a heart attack, severe indigestion and stress. They're keeping him overnight for observation, but he's going to be fine." The relief was overwhelming. I hadn't realized how terrified I'd been until that moment. "Where's Tyler?" I asked, looking around. "Getting coffee. He's been here all night." She pulled back to look at me. "You came. All this way. So quickly." "Of course I came. He's my dad." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "We've made such a mess of things, Julia." We sat in those uncomfortable hospital chairs, Mom's hand clutching mine. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the new worry lines that hadn't been there before I left. "Your father has been working too hard," she said. "The business has been struggling, and he won't delegate anything. The doctor says his blood pressure is dangerously high." "I thought the business was doing well," I said carefully. She gave me a sad smile. "It was, until last year. The economy, new competition, some bad investments. It's been difficult, but your father is too proud to admit it." A cold realization washed over me. Wait, so when Dad called about financial problems before the cruise, was that actually true? She looked away, embarrassed. "Partly. We were having cash flow issues, but the cruise was already paid for months before. A package deal through a business connection that couldn't be refunded. Your father didn't want to cancel it and disappoint everyone, but he was worried about upcoming expenses." "Then why exclude me? Why not just tell me the truth?" She sighed deeply. "The cruise only had 6 tickets. When we booked it, you were dating that doctor. What was his name? Brian? You talked about taking a trip with him, so we thought you wouldn't be interested in a family cruise. By the time you broke up with him and started planning your Greece trip, the cruise was non-refundable and non-transferable. But why lie about it? Why not just explain that? Your father thought you'd feel bad about being left out. Then when you mentioned Greece, he panicked. He really was worried about money, and the thought of you spending your savings when we might need help." She trailed off, looking ashamed. "It was wrong. We handled it all wrong." I sat back, processing this new information. Their actions were still selfish and manipulative, but at least there was a twisted logic to them that I hadn't seen before. "You should have just told me the truth," I said finally. "I'm an adult. I could have handled it. I know that now. I think we've all realized how much we underestimated you." She squeezed my hand. "You're thriving in California. Your father and I look at your photos and we can see how happy you are. It's made us question a lot of things." Tyler appeared then, balancing 3 coffee cups. His face lit up when he saw me. "You made it." He handed me a cup. "Dad's going to be so surprised." We spent the rest of the day taking turns sitting with Dad in his hospital room. He cried when he saw me, something I'd only seen him do once before, at my grandmother's funeral. We didn't talk about the past or the cruise or my move. We just sat together, watching bad daytime TV and making small talk about my job and his doctors. That evening, when he was sleeping, I went back to my parents' house with Mom. It felt strange to be in my childhood home as a visitor rather than a resident. My old bedroom had been converted into a home office, which felt oddly appropriate, a physical representation of my changed status. Mom made us tea, and we sat at the kitchen table like we used to when I'd come home from school and tell her about my day. "Your father and I are in counseling," she said suddenly. "Have been for a few months now." I nearly choked on my tea. "Really? You and Dad?" She nodded. After you left, things got difficult between us. We've been together so long, we'd fallen into patterns we didn't even recognize anymore. Patterns that weren't healthy. She looked directly at me. Patterns that hurt you. I didn't know what to say. My parents had always seemed like a unit, unshakable, unchangeable. The idea of them in therapy, examining their relationship, was completely foreign. Is it helping? I asked. I think so. It's painful sometimes, facing things we've avoided for years, but necessary. She reached across the table for my hand. One thing we've talked about a lot is how we treated you differently from your siblings. How we put more pressure on you, expected more from you. Because I was the oldest. Partly that, but also because you were always so capable, so reliable. We leaned on you in ways we shouldn't have. I felt tears prick my eyes. I just wanted to be included, to be considered. I know, sweetheart. And we failed you there, badly. The cruise was just the most obvious example of something we'd been doing for years. She wiped a tear from her cheek. When you moved to California, it forced us to face what we'd done, how we'd taken you for granted. We talked until well past midnight, really talked in a way we never had before. Mom told me about Dad's business struggles, about her own feelings of emptiness now that all her children were grown, about the tensions that had always simmered beneath the surface of their marriage. In return, I told her about my life in California. Not just the highlight reel I shared on social media, but the real day-to-day experiences. About my growing relationship with David, about my renewed interest in marine biology, about the friends I'd made and the sense of purpose I'd found. You're not coming back, are you? She asked as we were getting ready for bed. Not to live, no, I said gently. But I'll visit more. And you and Dad can come out to see me too. She nodded, accepting what she probably already knew. We're proud of you, Julia, even if we haven't shown it the right way. The next day, Dad was released from the hospital with strict instructions to reduce stress and improve his diet. Back at the house, as he settled onto the couch with his prescribed medications laid out on the coffee table, he finally brought up what we'd all been avoiding. I need to apologize to you, Julia, he said, his voice still weak but determined. For the cruise, for making you cancel your trip, for all of it. There's no excuse. Dad, you don't have to. I do, he interrupted. Your mother told me about your conversation last night. She's right. We've treated you unfairly for years, expected you to be the responsible one, the reliable one, while giving your siblings more freedom. It wasn't right. I sat beside him on the couch, feeling a lifetime of emotions rise to the surface. Why did you do it? He looked thoughtful, considering his answer carefully. Because you could handle it. Because you never complained. Because it was easier than pushing Tyler or dealing with Brittany's drama. He shook his head. Those aren't good reasons, I know, but they're the truth. Dad's health scare created an unexpected opportunity for healing in our family. During the week I stayed in Chicago, we had more honest conversations than we'd had in the previous decade combined. It wasn't always comfortable. There were tears, raised voices, and old hurts brought to light. But it felt necessary and long overdue. Brittany and Tyler joined us for several of these discussions, and I was surprised to discover they had their own complicated feelings about our family dynamic. Tyler admitted feeling overlooked as the middle child, while Brittany confessed to deliberately creating drama to get attention. We were like actors realizing we'd been playing assigned roles without ever questioning the script. By the time I had to return to California, something fundamental had shifted. The change wasn't complete or perfect, but it was real. Dad hugged me at the airport with tears in his eyes and said, I'm sorry we held you back for so long. Go live your life on your terms. Back in San Diego, I threw myself into my work and relationship with renewed energy. David and I grew closer, spending weekends exploring the coastline or volunteering at marine conservation events. He came from a close-knit family himself, but respected the complicated journey I was on with mine. Families are like ecosystems, he told me one evening as we watched the sunset from my balcony. They can either support growth or stifle it. Sometimes you have to disrupt the system to make it healthier. 3 months after Dad's hospital stay, my parents surprised me by accepting my invitation to visit California. They stayed in a hotel near my apartment, and I took 4 days off work to show them my new life. I introduced them to David, took them to my favorite beaches and restaurants, and even brought them to the hospital to meet my colleagues. It was awkward at times. Mom still occasionally slipped into her habit of making subtle comments about my appearance or choices, but there was a genuine effort on all sides to forge a new kind of relationship. On their last evening, as we had dinner at a seaside restaurant, Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To Julia," he said, "who had the courage to break the pattern and show us all a better way." Mom nodded, adding, "And to new beginnings for all of us." I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the California sunshine. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. Some wounds were still too fresh for that. But it was acceptance and a willingness to move forward. After they returned to Chicago, our communication found a new rhythm. Weekly video calls where we actually talked about meaningful things. Occasional care packages from Mom with homemade cookies and Chicago memorabilia. Dad sending articles about marine conservation with notes saying he was learning about my interests. 6 months later, my travel nursing contract was ending, and I had a decision to make. The hospital had offered me a permanent position with a significant salary increase. David and I were discussing moving in together. Everything pointed to staying in California. I called my parents to discuss it, bracing myself for guilt trips or passive-aggressive comments. Instead, Dad said, "You sound happy there. That's all we want for you." Mom added, "We miss you, of course, but we can visit. And you can come home for Christmas, right?" That simple acknowledgement, that I could build my life where I chose while still remaining connected to them, meant everything. Christmas in Chicago that year was different from any before. The familiar traditions remained, but the underlying tension that had always hummed beneath the surface was noticeably diminished. We exchanged thoughtful gifts rather than the impersonal gift cards of previous years. We played board games without the usual competitive sniping. We talked about plans and dreams and even politics without anyone storming away from the table. On my last night there, Mom knocked on my bedroom door, now a guest room with a pull-out sofa, with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "I have something for you," she said, sitting beside me on the bed. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $800, the exact amount I'd lost in cancellation fees for my Greece trip. "It's not enough," she said quietly. "It doesn't make up for what happened. But your father and I want you to know that we understand now what we did wrong." I stared at the check, a tangle of emotions making it hard to speak. "We've also set aside some money," she continued, "for a real family vacation next summer. All of us, including David if you want. Anywhere you'd like to go." She smiled tentatively. "Even Greece." The gesture was meaningful, but what mattered more was the acknowledgement behind it, the recognition of the hurt they'd caused and a genuine desire to make amends. "Thank you," I said, hugging her. "It means a lot." "You know," she said, pulling back to look at me, "when you first moved to California, I was terrified we'd lose you completely, that you'd cut us off, and rightfully so. Instead, I think we've finally started to find each other as adults." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It took distance to see things clearly. "Sometimes the people who love you the most see you the least clearly," she said with surprising insight. "We get stuck in who you were instead of seeing who you've become." Back in California, I pinned the check to my refrigerator but didn't cash it. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about being valued, being considered, being seen. As winter turned to spring, my life in San Diego continued to flourish. David and I found an apartment with a small yard where we could garden together. I accepted the permanent position at the hospital and began taking night classes in marine biology. We adopted a rescue dog, a one-eyed terrier mix named Captain, who joined us on our beach adventures. And every Sunday I called my parents. Not out of obligation or habit, but because I wanted to. We were building something new from the rubble of our old relationship, something more balanced, more honest, more healthy. 1 year after my move to California, I received an unexpected message from my brother Tyler. He'd been accepted to a graduate program in San Francisco and wanted my advice on making the move to the West Coast. "Mom and Dad are freaking out a little," he wrote. "2 kids in California might be more than they can handle. But seeing how happy you are there, I want some of that for myself." We talked for hours that night. I gave him practical advice about the cost of living, neighborhoods to consider, and the culture shock he might experience. But mostly, I listened as he shared his own feelings about our family dynamic. "You leaving was like someone turning on the lights," he said. "Suddenly, I could see all these patterns I'd never noticed before. How Dad always managed to make everything about him. How Mom enabled it all while pretending to be the peacekeeper. And how did I fit into those patterns?" I asked, curious about his perspective. He laughed. "You were the shock absorber, Jules. You took all the hits so the rest of us didn't have to. When you left, the whole system fell apart for a while." His words resonated with what Diane had told me that night before my move, about being the designated family caretaker. I hadn't fully appreciated how accurate that assessment was until I removed myself from the equation. "Do you think they've really changed?" I asked him. "I think they're trying," he said after a thoughtful pause. "The therapy seems to be helping. They fight differently now, more directly but less destructively, if that makes sense. And they actually ask about my life instead of just telling me what I should be doing with it. That's progress," I agreed. "It's all because of you, you know. You forced everyone to re-examine things when you left." I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd moved to California for myself, not as some grand gesture meant to spark family healing. But perhaps the most powerful changes often come from simply taking care of our own needs first. Tyler moved to San Francisco a few months later. Having him just a short drive away was an unexpected joy. We met for weekend adventures, exploring the California coastline and rediscovering our relationship as adults rather than just siblings navigating family politics. Meanwhile, my relationship with David continued to deepen. He proposed on a sailboat at sunset, with Captain the One-Eyed Terrier wearing a little bow tie for the occasion. It was perfect in its simplicity. Just the 3 of us, the ocean, and a future full of possibility. When I called my parents to share the news, their genuine excitement surprised me. There was no passive-aggressive commentary about the wedding location or suggestions that I should move back to Chicago for the planning. Instead, Mom asked thoughtful questions about what kind of celebration we wanted, and Dad offered to help financially, with no strings attached. "We want to support your vision, not impose ours," he said, words I never thought I'd hear from him. Brittany was the first to book her flight to visit after the engagement, arriving with a stack of bridal magazines and a bottle of champagne. "I'm so happy for you," she said as we sat on my patio, flipping through pages of white dresses. "David is perfect for you. He sees you for who you really are." "What do you mean?" I asked. She looked up from a page of bridesmaid dresses. "He appreciates your independence. Mom and Dad always acted like your self-sufficiency was some kind of character flaw, like you weren't allowing them to be needed." She shook her head. "David celebrates the very things they tried to change about you." Her insight caught me off guard. Brittany had never been this perceptive about family dynamics before. "Tyler says you're thinking of a beach wedding," she continued. "Mom's surprisingly okay with it. I think she's finally accepted that you're not coming back to Chicago." "It took her long enough," I laughed. "Hey, be fair. They're really trying." She sipped her champagne. "You know, after you moved, Dad took me to lunch and asked if I thought he'd been a good father to me." "What did you say?" I told him the truth, that he'd been more patient with me than with you or Tyler, but that his favoritism had its own problems. It made me feel like I didn't have to try as hard, like I could just coast through life making messes that someone else would clean up. She gave me a rueful smile. "Usually you." "And how did he take that?" "He cried, Jules, right there in Applebee's over his riblets. Said he'd never realized how his behavior affected all of us differently. The idea of my stoic, opinion-filled father crying in a chain restaurant over parenting regrets was almost impossible to imagine. Yet it aligned with the changes I'd been seeing in him. Wedding planning brought new tests for our evolving family dynamic. There were occasional slips into old patterns, Mom suggesting traditional elements I had no interest in, Dad questioning our decision to keep the ceremony small, but they recovered quickly, usually apologizing without prompting. The real test came 3 months before the wedding, when David and I found our dream house. It was a modest bungalow with a large yard, just 10 minutes from the beach, and with enough space for a home office that could double as a guest room. The catch: we needed help with the down payment to make it work. I was reluctant to ask my parents after everything that had happened, but David encouraged me. They want to be part of your life. This is a way to let them. So I called them, prepared for conditions or lectures about fiscal responsibility. Instead, Dad simply asked how much we needed and when. Consider it an early wedding present, he said. No strings, no expectations. 2 weeks later, they flew out to see the house. Mom brought a small lemon tree as a housewarming gift. For new beginnings, she said. And Dad spent the weekend helping David install shelves and fix a leaky faucet. There was an ease between them that I'd never witnessed before. A genuine connection not mediated through me. That night, as we sat around our new backyard fire pit, Mom raised her wine glass. To Julia and David, and their beautiful new home. And to family, Dad added. The one we're born with and the one we choose. I caught his eye across the flames and saw something there I'd been waiting for. Not just regret or apology, but true understanding. He finally saw me as my own person, not just an extension or reflection of himself. The wedding was everything we'd hoped for. Simple, intimate, and held on the same beach where David and I had spent our first date. Tyler stood beside me as my man of honor, while Brittany's daughters scattered wildflowers along the sand aisle. My parents walked me down the beach together, each holding one of my arms. Just before giving me away, Dad whispered, "I'm so proud of the woman you've become, especially the parts that had nothing to do with me." It was perhaps the most honest and loving thing he'd ever said to me. At the reception, held at a nearby restaurant with a deck overlooking the ocean, my mother surprised everyone by giving an unscheduled toast. When Julia was little, she began, she used to say she wanted to live by the ocean. I always dismissed it as a child's fantasy. She paused, looking around at the waves crashing nearby. I should have listened more and directed less, because here she is, living that very dream, with a wonderful partner by her side. She raised her glass. To dreams that persist, even when others try to redirect them. I danced with my father as the sun set over the Pacific. The tradition of a father-daughter dance had almost been something I skipped, given our complicated history, but in that moment, I was glad we'd included it. "Remember how you used to stand on my feet when we danced at family weddings?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I do," I said, surprised he remembered such a small detail from my childhood. "You'd always complain that I was getting too big." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I was always so focused on what you were outgrowing that I missed seeing what you were becoming." He glanced over at David, who was chatting with my colleagues from the hospital. "He's a good man. He sees you clearly." "Yes, he does," I agreed. "I'm sorry it took me so long to do the same," Dad said. After the wedding, David and I stayed in California for our honeymoon, exploring the coastline up to Big Sur. We'd decided to save Greece for another time, when we could truly enjoy it without the shadow of past disappointments. When we returned home, we settled into married life with an ease that sometimes surprised me. My relationship with my family continued to evolve in positive ways. Mom and I had weekly video calls that felt more like conversations between friends than the strained check-ins of the past. Dad sent thoughtful gifts that showed he was paying attention to my interests. Books about marine conservation, a sophisticated underwater camera, a donation in my name to protect sea turtle habitats. 6 months after the wedding, I received a job offer that seemed tailor-made for my evolving career goals. A position with a marine conservation nonprofit that would allow me to combine my nursing background with my passion for ocean preservation. The role involved some travel, including potential international assignments. In the past, I might have hesitated to accept, worrying about moving even further from my family's expectations. Instead, I said yes immediately, then called my parents to share the news. "That sounds perfect for you," Mom said without a trace of reservation. "We're so proud." Dad added, "You always did love the ocean. I should have paid more attention to that when you were younger." Their genuine support felt like the final confirmation of how far we'd all come. My first assignment with the new organization took me to Hawaii for 3 weeks, working with a team monitoring coral reef health. I sent my family daily updates and photos, knowing they were genuinely interested in this chapter of my life. When I returned, I found a package waiting from my parents. Inside was a framed photograph of me as a child, maybe 6 or 7, building a sandcastle at Lake Michigan. Written on the back in my father's neat handwriting, "You always knew where you belonged. I'm sorry it took us so long to see it too." 2 years after my wedding, I stood in the Athens airport, watching my family navigate the crowded terminal. We'd finally made that trip to Greece, all of us together. My parents, Brittany and her family, Tyler and his new girlfriend, and David and me. It had taken years to get here, but somehow that made it more meaningful. The journey wasn't just geographical. Each of us had traveled our own path to reach this point of genuine connection. My parents had continued their therapy, working through decades of unhealthy patterns. Tyler had found his passion in environmental law. Brittany had started her own business, stepping out of the family drama queen role she'd played for so long. And me? I'd completed my marine biology degree and now split my time between nursing and conservation work. David and I were expecting our first child, a daughter, in 4 months. We'd turned the second bedroom of our bungalow into a nursery painted with ocean murals. As we loaded our luggage into the rental vans, Dad pulled me aside. "Remember when I told you not to come to Greece? What a fool I was." He shook his head, gazing at the bright Athenian sky. I was so busy trying to control everyone's lives that I couldn't see how much I was limiting my own. "We got here eventually," I said, squeezing his arm. "Yes, but on your terms, not mine. That's the difference." He looked at my growing baby bump. "You're going to be a wonderful mother, Julia. You know why? Why? Because you understand what took me a lifetime to learn. That love doesn't mean control. It means supporting someone as they become who they're meant to be, not who you think they should be." That night, as we sat at an outdoor taverna in Plaka, beneath the illuminated Acropolis, I looked around at my family with a sense of wonder. My mother was attempting to learn Greek phrases from our waiter, laughing at her own pronunciation. Tyler and his girlfriend were deep in conversation with Brittany's husband about sustainable tourism. Brittany was teaching her children how to eat dolmades, encouraging them to try new foods. These were the same people who had once excluded me from a family cruise, who had manipulated me into canceling this very trip. Yet they weren't the same at all. We had all changed, grown, healed. David leaned over to whisper in my ear. "Happy?" "Beyond," I replied, resting my hand on my belly where our daughter kicked gently. "I never thought we'd actually all make it to Greece together." "Sometimes the longest journeys aren't measured in miles," he said. Our 2-week Greek adventure took us from Athens to Santorini, then to Crete and Rhodes. Each location was more beautiful than the last, but what struck me most was how different this trip felt from the solo journey I'd originally planned. There was a richness to sharing these experiences with the people I loved, even the ones who had once hurt me so deeply. In Santorini, we took a sunset cruise around the caldera. As our boat glided through the cobalt waters, my mother sat beside me on the deck. "I keep thinking about how you were going to experience all this alone," she said, looking up at the white buildings perched on the cliffs above us. "Not because you wanted to, but because we made you feel like you had to." "I did want to," I corrected her gently. "I was excited about a solo adventure." She nodded, acknowledging my point. "But you shouldn't have had to choose between having your own experiences and being included in ours." "No, I shouldn't have. I was jealous," she admitted, surprising me. "Of your independence, your courage. I never traveled anywhere alone. I went from my parents' house to college to marriage. The idea of you doing something so bold made me feel—" She searched for the word. "Small." Her honesty touched me. You could still do those things, Mom. It's not too late. She smiled. Maybe. But right now, I'm exactly where I want to be. She squeezed my hand. With my remarkable daughter who had the courage to show us all a better way to be a family. Later that week, as we stood on the white cliffs of Santorini watching the famous sunset, my mother linked her arm through mine. I've been thinking about that cruise, she said quietly. I tensed slightly. We rarely spoke directly about it anymore, treating it as a painful chapter best left in the past. What about it? I asked. It was a terrible thing we did to you. Unforgivable, really. She turned to face me, the golden light of the setting sun illuminating her aging face. Yet somehow you found a way to forgive us. You created the space for all of this. She gestured to our family scattered along the cliff edge, taking photos and pointing out fishing boats, to become possible. I didn't forgive you right away, I admitted. It took time. Of course it did. And you had every right to hold on to that hurt. She squeezed my arm. But you didn't let it define you. You didn't use it as an excuse to shut us out forever. You set boundaries, yes, but you left the door open for us to do better. The sun dipped lower, turning the white buildings to gold and pink. I used to think family meant sacrifice, I said. That loving someone meant always putting their needs first. And now? I watched David helping Brittany's youngest climb onto a low wall for a better view. My father and brother stood nearby, pointing out a dolphin in the distance. There was ease in their postures, genuine warmth in their interactions. Now I think real family supports each other's joy, I said, even when that joy takes different forms than we expected. Mom nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. Your father and I wasted so many years trying to control outcomes. We nearly lost you in the process. But you didn't, I reminded her. No, we didn't. Thanks to your courage and persistence. She placed her hand gently on my belly. Your daughter is so lucky. She'll have a mother who knows how to love without conditions. On our last night in Greece, we gathered for a farewell dinner at a restaurant overlooking the sea. We had spent 14 days together, sharing experiences that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The trip hadn't been perfect. There had been occasional moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. But we had navigated them with a new awareness and respect for each other's boundaries. As we finished our meal, my father stood and raised his glass. It wasn't a planned speech. I could tell by the emotion in his eyes that the words were coming from a place of spontaneous feeling. I want to thank Julia, he said, his voice steady but full of feeling. Not just for organizing this incredible trip, but for teaching an old man that it's never too late to learn how to love better. He looked around the table. Each of you has taught me something important, but Julia's lesson was perhaps the hardest for me to accept, that true love means letting go. He turned to me. When you moved to California, I thought we'd lost you. What I didn't understand was that I'd never really had you, not the real you. I had the version of you that fit into my narrow vision of what a daughter should be. He smiled at David, then at my baby bump. Now I get to know the authentic Julia, on her terms. And she's so much more remarkable than the person I tried to make her be. I felt tears welling in my eyes as he continued. So, here's to second chances, he said, raising his glass higher. To the family we're rebuilding together. And to my first grandchild, who will be loved for exactly who she is, from the very beginning. Everyone raised their glasses, and I saw that I wasn't the only one fighting back tears. Even Brittany's usually stoic husband looked moved. That night, in our cliffside hotel room, I told David about my conversation with my mother. It's strange, I said as we sat on our balcony, watching the moonlight on the water. 3 years ago, I couldn't have imagined being here with them, feeling this sense of peace. You created that peace, he said. You showed them a better way to be a family. I thought about how close I'd come to simply accepting their treatment, to canceling Greece and never discovering the Caribbean cruise. How easily I might have continued in the role they'd assigned me, the reliable one, the caretaker, the one who always sacrificed. Instead, I'd found the courage to break the pattern. Not through dramatic confrontations or ultimatums, but through the quiet power of living authentically and requiring respect. Our daughter kicked inside me, a gentle reminder of the future unfolding. I placed my hand where I'd felt her movement, thinking about the family culture we would create for her. One of honesty, mutual support, and the freedom to become herself. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, noticing my contemplative silence. "About journeys," I said. "How sometimes the most important ones have nothing to do with geography." He covered my hand with his own. "What will you tell her about all this someday?" he asked, referring to our unborn daughter. I considered the question carefully. "I'll tell her that families are imperfect, that people make mistakes, but that growth is always possible. I'll tell her that boundaries aren't walls. They're the foundation of healthy love. And about your parents? I'll tell her they're complicated people who learned eventually how to love better. I want her to know both versions of them, who they were and who they became." The next morning, we gathered for breakfast on the hotel terrace. As I looked around the table at my family, imperfect, complex, but genuinely trying, I felt a deep sense of completion. We had all traveled so far to reach this point, and not just in miles. The path had been complicated, with wrong turns and painful moments. But here we were, on the edge of the Aegean Sea, together in ways that mattered. Not because of obligation or appearances, but because we had each done the difficult work of growth and reconciliation. I thought back to that January day when I'd canceled my Greece reservations, the crushing disappointment I'd felt. I could never have imagined then that my canceled trip would eventually lead to this richer, more authentic experience. Not just of Greece, but of family itself. As if reading my thoughts, my father raised his coffee cup in a quiet toast. "To Julia," he said simply, "who taught us all how to do better." Everyone joined the toast, their faces soft with genuine affection. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted can lead you to something far more valuable than you ever imagined. 3 months later, back in our California home, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. We named her Thalia, after the Greek muse of flourishing, a tribute to the country where our family had finally found its way back to each other, and a wish for her future. As I held her in my arms for the first time, with David beside me and my parents waiting anxiously in the hospital lobby, I made her a silent promise that she would always know she was enough, exactly as she was, that her dreams would be celebrated, not redirected, that her boundaries would be respected, that love, in our family, would never come with conditions. The cruelest exclusion had ultimately opened the door to the most meaningful inclusion, not just to a vacation, but to a new way of being family.